C. Oscar Baker,
Okay.
or Charles Oscar Baker. I go by C. Oscar or Charles O. It's an alias I can use whenever I want to get something special done. Yeah.
And you live in?
I live in Mount Airy,
Okay.
and just passed 91 years.
Okay.
So, and I still know where I am.
How long have you lived in? Did you grow up in Mount Airy?
I was born right outside of, well, at that time it was outside of town, but now it's incorporated into town. And I've been there all my life, yeah. Yep, the whole time.
Did you grow up on a farm? Or?
Yep, grew up on a farm, and my father was a farmer. And he died rather young, at 58 years of age, of a heart attack. Worked himself to death, I guess, back in those days, because no tractors. You know, I've said this to a lot of people. I think I've lived in the best time frame with no automobiles to a trip to the moon. You know, that's fabulous as far as progress is concerned. And so, yeah, and my brother, I had a brother and a sister. My brother got shot and killed. He had a little grocery store in Mount Airy area, and he was always a farmer, but he had to get off the farm because he had a heart attack, and he bought this little store and was doing great. Held up one night, and he was shot and killed. And my sister lived to be 97, but she didn't know any of us for the last 5 years because she had Alzheimer's. So I guess that's where I get my genes from her, but I hope I know where I am, because I think that's an awful way to have to go through life, not know your family.
So now you grew up on a farm, and you worked on the farm till?
Well, I never liked the farm. I wanted to get off of that dumb thing as soon as I could, because it was very, very demanding, and you had to be there to milk these cows and all that stuff. So I got off when I was drafted in the Army. That's how I got off, because when I came back, I didn't have anything to do with the farm. I got a job in a clothing store as a clerk there in town, which we don't have anymore. At one time we had 4 grocery stores on Main Street. Now you can't buy a loaf of bread in the town. It's on the outskirts in the shopping centers.
What was the clothing store? Do you remember the name of it?
The grocery store?
Yeah, the store.
One of them was A&P, and one was I forget the name of it now, Acme store.
Okay.
And then there were 2 privately owned. One was Mr. Browning, and the other one was Mr. Smith. So, and I knew all those guys. And you know, back then the population of Mount Airy was 800 people, and we knew everybody. Now I don't hardly know my next door neighbor. As I told you before, in Wrinkle City where I live, there are a lot of strangers come into town because they want to be close to their kids. This is an area that has about 160 houses, and you have to be 62 to buy one of these houses. And a lot of the people that moved there from other states to be close to their children, and you can't blame them for that. But they're awful nice people. Old people are pretty good people.
I think so.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now, you've been involved with Mount Airy in many, many, many ways.
Yes, well, I have. First of all, it's a town that, like no other as far as I'm concerned, it's I don't know, it just has certain attributes that is hard to come by in other places. The people are so congenial, and they look out for each other so much. I guess most small towns are like that, but I didn't know any others. But I started out, as I told you, as a clerk in this clothing store. And when I came back from the service, and jobs were hard to come by, and I worked there for $30 a week. And I got married in 1946. I got out of the service in 45, got married in 46, and my first apartment was over the theater there then, the town theater, 2 bedrooms, a heated garage for $26 a month. So that fit my pocketbook pretty good, so we stayed there until I bought my first house on Park Avenue, 3 bedrooms, and for $9,000, brand new. And I kept it for 10 years and sold it for $10,000, so I made a tremendous profit on that in 10 years. And the guy still lives there too. He and I are real good friends. And so then we built a house down on Butler Road, which was right outside of town. my wife bugged me. She didn't want to raise the kids on the street of the town, so we went out there and talked Mr. Van Zandt into selling us a lot. At that time, the lot was a half acre for $1,000. So you can't begin to do that now. Of course, nothing else is cheap either. And so we stayed there from 1958 until 1995, when I moved into this house, my wife and I. She had Parkinson's for 27 years, and we had to cut down our size, and I couldn't do everything, so I moved into town where everything on the outside is taken care of for $65 a month, still that way. So that's up to that point. What else you want?
Well, I've heard you were kind of involved with the fire department?
Oh, yes, kind of. I just finished up 71 years with Mount Airy Fire Department, and I had 32 years in the Federal Fire Service, and I retired as fire chief at the National Bureau of Standards in Gaithersburg. But I worked at Walter Reed Hospital in the fire service, and over on the other side of Washington. I can't think of the name of the place now. See, the first thing happens when you get old. The second thing that happens is you lose your memory. I can't remember what the first thing is, but it's tough to get old. But anyway, yeah, the fire service has been my sole interest in my whole life. And I had 3 boys, and would you believe it, none of the 3 are ever interested in the fire service. I guess they heard too much of it from me, but none of the 3 of them. One lives in California, one on the Eastern Shore, and one close by my house. So.
How'd you get interested?
Yeah.
How did you get interested in fire service?
How did I get interested? Well, back in 1946, out of the service, well, it was right before I went in. I joined in 41, and it was because there was nothing else to do. Plus the fact that I thought it would be fabulous to ride on the back of that fire truck and wave at my friends as they're going down the street with a siren blowing. I thought that would be fabulous. So that's the reasons that I joined, and I stayed with it. And I ended up, I was past president of the fire company there in Mount Airy. I was president when we bought that carnival grounds. It's still going great. We bought 46 acres for $13,000, which I thought was pretty good. And we still got it. And we've turned down $1.5 million for it, so it must be worth something. But anyway, and then I went on to the Carroll County government fire service, and I represented the company for 40-some years in the Carroll County Fire Service at monthly meetings. And then I got interested and worked my way up to vice president and finally president of the Maryland State Firemen's Association in 1978. And then when I retired in 79 from the federal service, Carroll County was getting ready to hire I was trying to talk them into hiring a fire administrator, but instead of that, they hired a safety person, part-time. So I got that job, 3 days a week. And after about 2 years, we convinced the commissioners at that time, we only had 3 commissioners, to change that over to part-time fire administrator and part-time safety. And then finally it was changed over completely to fire administrator, and that's when I stayed there from 1979 until 1986. And that was when I left the county government. So ever since then I've been active for a while, but recently when you get close to 90 years old, you think about slowing up a little bit. So I slowed up a good bit and got out of a lot of things, except I still like the idea of being involved with the Commission on Aging of Carroll County and representing the Mount Airy area. So that's the thing that I do.
What do you do with that?
What do we do? Well, we try to think about things to help the seniors that are not able to help themselves, first of all. It's disabilities and seniors, and they have a bureau in the county government that takes care of that, and we meet once a month and try to update ourselves and the people involved with the county full-time on what the seniors need and what their needs are. And we got started with the expo. It's in the fall every year. It's an annual thing. And the seniors really turn out for that because they're hungry for information and they need help. Most all of them need some kind of help. And that's what it's all about, really.
Well, I'm going to go back a little bit to the talking about the fire department. And how have things changed?
How do things change?
Over the years from when you started?
Oh, boy. Well, that one of the reasons I got out of representing Mount Airy is because they got to talking about things that I didn't understand. And I thought, you know, this is more of a young man's business now. And I've served my time, and that was the main reason I got out of it, because especially on EMS, Emergency Medical Service, that has really gone haywire and advanced. Right now, when you call for an ambulance in your home, you get a portable emergency room, is exactly what it is. It's the same thing, the treatment that you get if you were taken to the emergency room without going through the ambulance operation. But if you have a paramedic on that ambulance, you got the same as emergency room operation. And I think that's fabulous. And it's only getting better all the time. So I don't know how much better it can get, but that's the biggest change I've seen. Fire service, the biggest change there is the price of the equipment. Golly day. I remember when I was president of Mount Airy, we bought a new fire truck for $19,500. You know what we paid for the last one? Almost right about $500,000. Isn't that ridiculous? The ambulance is now $250,000, and with our setup with the county government, we have to buy all of our equipment and the buildings, and the county helps us out on the operating costs. But it's going to come soon that there's going to have to be a paid emergency medical service in the county, because you can only stretch these guys so far. And the volunteers are slowly wearing out, and they're slowly hiring people to do this job, part-time as well as full-time. And it's going to have to come to that sooner or later. That's what I tell the county commissioners, that they better be planning for this, because it's going to hit all at once and they're not going to be planning for it.
What do you see a change in people willing to volunteer for the fire department, and how's that changed?
Well, it's not that they're not willing, it's that their time is so consumed by, look what all is in the area now to take people's time. First of all, the organization of youngsters, like children, their children, these guys have been active in the fire service, they have children, and look at the amount of time they have to spend shuttling them back and forth and making sure that they're taken care of, school and all. And so many civic clubs to take your time, playing golf, which was something rather new compared to years ago. And so there's just so many things, hunting in the fall and all that stuff. It takes a lot of time, and the guys can only have so much time. We find that when a guy joins a fire department, usually between the age of 17 and 19, he'll join, and then with all the training that's required, golly, you wouldn't believe the amount of hours you have to spend now in training before you can even ride on a fire truck. And then you've got to maintain this interest all the way through and keep taking training. There's so many facets of it. And then the first thing you know, they get married, they have other interests, and they get married, and then some of them drop from that then. Some keep on, but there's very small percentage now we find of the 20 or 21-year-old young man or girl. Now there's so many of them in the female side in the fire service and the ambulance, that they move on, and you can't blame them. You know, they got to have a life of their own as well as helping somebody else all the time. So I don't know what the future. You can see this developing all over the country. It's not just here. I know I've been watching Frederick County, how they've gone through this, and they jumped into it real fast, and now they're hurting because they're looking for ways to finance the money situation, and it's difficult. Carroll County, as far as I'm concerned, and I brag about this at the state meetings and all, that they've done it the right way, because it's a partial deal, and you feel your way along instead of jumping into it full for feet both ways. So that's the story of that.
How has the Mount Airy area changed over the years? I mean, you've got 90 years of
Yeah.
of watching.
Well,
things.
the biggest change I see is, like we talked about earlier, the main street was the main town. And I can remember on Saturday night when I was a child, we'd all get in the car after eating our dinner and go out town and sit and get a good parking place so that my mother could wind down the window and talk to people as they walked down the street. And now, you know, as I said before, you hardly know your next door neighbor, and there's not that camaraderie that you used to have. It's now there's so many interests taking people's lives all kind of ways. There are some still volunteer organizations, Lions Club and things, Kiwanis and things like that, that certainly do a lot of good for the communities as well. But now, as we said before, the stores are not downtown. They're in isolated areas of shopping centers. And we have at least 2 there in town, and I'm sure there would be more if it was allowed. But the town fathers don't want to see that happen too quickly, and who knows if it's right or wrong, I don't know. But it's inevitable, I think. It's going to happen. But that's the biggest change I see, is the spreading out and all of the communities that have been built. Back in 1945 or 50, there was probably 1 development in the town. Now you can't count them on both hands how many there are, and that's a lot of people. We have one community has 250 townhouses. Now that's a lot of townhouses, and some of them have garages and some don't. But and then there's a big industrial park there in town that we never had before. Industrial park was never heard of, but it's something that has come along and probably helped out the community more than anything because of the tax base.
What was the biggest? What did most people do when you were growing up? I mean, were they farmers? What did the biggest industry then?
A lot of them were farmers. Some of them worked in Baltimore. During World War II, they worked at the shipyard in Baltimore, a lot of them. And it was a long commute, but they worked maybe 10 hours and then came home and turned around and get a few hours sleep and go back. But yeah, most of them worked around town. Well, there were several big employees around. People's Lumber Supply had a whole bunch of people that worked there. And incidentally, when the siren blew, those people were allowed to go without docking their pay, too. That's another thing that's problematic. Where our firehouse is now, if you had a siren and blew it, nobody would hear it but the people that lived nearby. There was no businesses around that could hear it. So there's another big change. And if we sit and talked a long enough time, I could point out a lot more changes, but it's just kind of hard to do. But you haven't asked me about the Army yet. I was drafted in the Army in 1943. And a good friend of mine and I were drafted the same day. We both had said, we're not going, they're going to have to come get us, so we were drafted. And we went to Fort Meade, and neither one of us had been away from home a night in our life when we were drafted, and both single boys.
How old were you then?
1941, I was 19. Yeah, and so was he. And we got on this train at Fort Meade, and we didn't know where we was going, ended up in Fort Lewis, Washington for basic training. And when we got there that night, it was raining, and the band was playing Hail, Hail, the Gang's All Here. That made us feel real good. But we looked on the map later, and we found out we'd have been 90 miles closer to home in the northwestern tip of Ireland. so we were a long ways from home. Anyway, then I was selected to go to school, and I still don't know why, but they sent me to the University of Idaho at Moscow for some more testing, and then they sent me to the University of Oregon. I was there for 9 months in the engineering courses. And then they broke down, this was called the Army Specialized Training Program, ASTP. And they had colleges all over the country that were taking these people in. Then in September, before the invasion in June of Europe, they disbanded all of this so they get everybody they could in the ground forces. So I didn't go over right away for the D-Day, but 2 months later I went overseas and did fine up until the Battle of the Bulge, and I got hurt badly, and then I was. And the same day they were carrying me up the gangplank on the hospital ship to come home, they gave me the Stars and Stripes that said VE Day. The same day, May the 8th, 1945. And I laughed and told people I went over to do a job, and when it was over, I came home. So the same day. But, and let me finish the story about this guy. When I went away to school, we were both in the 44th Division, Infantry Division in Fort Lewis. And when I went away to school, then I went to the 11th Armored Division after they broke us up in Camp Cook, California. And I went overseas, and he went overseas with his division. I got wounded, he got wounded, and the same day I got in Butner General Hospital in North Carolina, he was leaving. The same day. Can you imagine that? Chased him around the world practically, and the same day that I got to this hospital in North Carolina, he was leaving. So that was, and I said, you'll be dumb enough to go back to Fort Meade to re-enlist? No, I'm getting out of here. He stayed for 22 years. He had a heck of a good job. He ended up first sergeant and recruiting out of Frederick, Maryland. Yep.
You said you were 19, never been away from home.
Right.
Suddenly now you're in Europe in the middle of this.
Oh man, going overseas was sad. We were on a ship that carried a whole division, 12,000 men, and it was an Italian luxury liner, and they had 4 bunks high on the deck because inside there wasn't enough room for everybody. And they had 4 bunks high, and you have to get in line to eat. Well, the time you got through your first meal during the middle of the day, you got back in line for the evening meal. So you did nothing but stand in line all day to eat 2 meals. And we'd stand at nighttime on the rail, pitch dark, looking at the other ships in the convoy and wondering whether we would be coming back, you know. That was tough for young guys. It really was. Yep, but I made it back.
And you mentioned earlier that you are in 4 Hall of Fames. Tell me about that.
Oh yeah. Well, when you're in something so long, I guess they put you in the Hall of Fame to get rid of you. But anyhow, I'm in the Mount Airy Town Hall of Fame, the Carroll County Fireman's Hall of Fame, the Maryland State Fireman's Hall of Fame, and the Maryland State Senior Citizens Hall of Fame. So, somebody there in town put me in for the senior citizens. The reason they put me in for that was, as I told you earlier, where I live now, I helped to get that started back in 1992. That was a deal too. When he asked me about see how far I could get with that, we got these people interested. We sit down and made up list of things that we wanted. Everybody wanted an attached garage because there'd be a lot of widows and they could go in the garage, shut the door, and get out of the car and know it's safe. So that every house there now has that. And also every house none of them have doorknobs. They all have levers that you can put similar to what you have here. And they're all 36 inches wide, the doorways for wheelchairs. And just little things like that we came up with. There's no steps, except my house has a second floor. There for a while, I used it when my wife was living, but had kids come home, they'd stay upstairs. But now I haven't hardly been upstairs since she died almost. But anyway, it turned out to be one of the nicest things in the town. And so they gave me credit for that. And then we have, at the end of where we live was Wildwood Park, where they used to have the Firemans Carnivals. And that's another story. I don't want to bore you with all this stuff.
This is good. I was going to ask about Firemans.
Well, anyhow, at the end of this park, the town has a little park there, and they got walkway around it and benches to sit on and a gazebo in the middle. Well, I got the idea of why don't we have some concerts in the gazebo? So I went to the town. The first year, the town paid for it. And so we had 4 concerts. Local bands, like Browningsville Band, Westminster Band came over there, and they still do. And and then the town said it was too expensive, so we looked up and found a local man who has paid for that ever since. And it's a self-storage gentleman there, a wonderful person, and he puts out several $1,000s each year to pay for this. So we have the second and fourth Sunday of June, July, and August, we have a band concert in that park. And you'd be surprised now the number of people come out and bring their chairs or their blankets and whatnot, and it's really a nice evening.
You talked about how any more people don't know their neighbors, so I was wondering about the popularity of the Firemans Carnival, because that gives people that hometown feel.
Yeah, that really is, and that's come a long ways too. Back when I first remember it happening, we had it up in Wildwood Park where I live now, and on Tuesday and Wednesday, the Ladies Auxiliary would go with the firemen. We'd go with fire trucks all around the countryside picking up items for the carnival. And we gave us live chickens and eggs and potatoes out of the garden and tomatoes and all this stuff. So then on Thursday morning, we would kill these chickens, and the Ladies Auxiliary would pick the feathers off of them, and they had a great big pot, like a butchering kettle, and they filled that half full of lard, and that's where they fried the chickens. After they killed them, they'd cut them up and fry these chickens, and then we'd have fried chicken dinner always had a fried chicken dinner for Thursday night at the carnival. And Thursday afternoon at 2 o'clock, there was a parade, always 2 o'clock on Thursday. This parade's still on Thursday, but it's 7 o'clock now. But anyway, so one year, in 1946, in between the parade and the dinner at night at the carnival, my wife and I went to Baltimore. I had a cousin who worked in a jewelry store. So we bought a diamond engagement ring and came back, and she flaunted that all night, you know. So I laugh and tell people I started out my life, married life, at Wildwood Park, and now I'm living there, and I'll end up my life at Wildwood Park. So now, how much more romantic can you be than that?
That's pretty good.
That's pretty good.
How has the carnival changed and attendance changed over the years?
Oh, well, back then the entertainment was boxing and wrestling, and now it's country music and all kind of music for the younger generation. That's one of the biggest differences. And there's so many more things. Who would ever thought they'd have rides like they do now at a carnival, when back then you were lucky to have a merry-go-round. And now, gosh, you got all kind of stuff, crazy rides that the kids just love. And that's the biggest change. And the amount of people there. And this carnival ground, on several nights of the carnival, you can't hardly find a place to park another car. Now it's about 24 acres left, and that's all full, plus across the road at the shopping center. They walk across now and park there. So, and another thing is, I remember back when I was president of the carnival, we cleared about $8,000 or $9,000. Last year we cleared over 100,000. So that's unusual too. So a lot of people, lots of people.
What do you think makes Mount Airy so special?
What makes it special? The people. The people, I guess. We have had a former commissioner of motor vehicles for the state of Maryland come from Mount Airy, and his house now is rated historical, and it's got a plaque out in front of it. And no, there's just a lot of good, decent people around Mount Airy, and where it sits, because where it sits and the railroad had a lot to do with the progression of the town of Mount Airy, because the railroad came along in about 1913, and the town was soon started to develop. And incidentally, my mother and I rode on one of the last passenger trains out of Mount Airy to the World's Fair in New York. And after that, they stopped running passenger trains because it wasn't lucrative enough. So, but I think the people are what causes the town to be a little bit special. And I don't know what else it could be. People have an advantage over a lot of things, or a disadvantage. They can make or break a lot of things. Yeah. Man, this has been going on for quite a while here now.
The only other question I wanted to ask you was, you talked about having seen so much during your life.
Yeah.
And the changes. What is some of the most impressive things that you've seen, and what do you think is going to happen in someone now, growing up?
I have no way of predicting the future, because so much has happened in my lifetime that I would never have thought would occur. Look at all the advances in medicine alone. When I was growing up, whooping cough was almost a deadly disease. Now you hardly ever hear of it, and the same way. And a lot of diseases that came out, we never heard of cancer. I guess back then it was called consumption. I don't know what the affiliation was between the two, but we never heard the word of cancer when I was growing up. And people died of heart disease or lung disease or old age. People died of old age, and they didn't know what that meant, what killed them. Not old age, I wouldn't think. If it is, I'd be dead. But I don't think it's just old age. I think it's something else that comes along. And I'm a firm believer that if you keep moving and you keep working on a computer, why, your mind and your body will last a lot longer, because you can't expect your body to last if you just sit still. And I've been telling friends of mine that for years, and some of them listen to it and some don't, because I really think that's why I keep going, because I've always exercised and tried to keep moving. Not that I'm any different than anybody else, but I do think you have to keep moving. There were several things that I thought of coming over here that were extra special, and I can't think of one of them now. It's terrible. My memory, when you get older, I guess you do forget things, but I try not to, but you can't help it. So I can't think of any other situation, except the town has changed so much, and except stuff that you buy to eat. When I was home on the farm, when I was a kid, before I went into service, we lived off of what we grew. Even the beef and the pork and all. I can remember my poor mother, cold packing, they called it. You never heard that term, have you? Cold packing. That's how they kept preserved meats back then, before the advent of freezing. You put it in a jar, and then you put so much lard with it, almost cover it with lard, and then you cook it for so many hours, and then you put it in the basement, and you get it out later on as you want it. It used to be the best gravy come out of this lean meat that was put in those jars. Man, I loved my mother making that gravy on mashed potatoes and all. That was fabulous. And you grew your own food stuff all the way through. Potatoes and cabbage, everything like that. And you put cabbage in a jar and kept that. That's another story I could tell you about the Mount Airy canning factory. They used to have two big things there where they put chopped up cabbage for sauerkraut. This is a terrible thing to say, especially on the public view too. But anyway, my grandfather worked there in the lunchroom, and right beside him were these two big barrels where they put cabbage in. They had two men in there walking around with gum boots on, stomping it down as they put the cabbage in. They were chewing tobacco. Guess where they spit? right in this cabbage. So I'm sure they don't do that today, but I never forgot that, watching these guys. My grandfather said that, don't ever eat that stuff, boy. Yeah, so there's some of the things that stick in your mind that you can remember from way back. Yeah, the canning factory was there, and before my time, there was a place where they brought people out of Baltimore for tuberculosis. And it was a small infirmary, and they had nurses and all there, and they'd bring these kids, mostly kids, out of Baltimore in May, and they'd stay there because this was the highest elevation. And that was the only supposedly cure for tuberculosis back then, was the height and the clean air. So they would keep them there until about October and then take them back to Baltimore. I don't know if it helped or not, but that's the only thing they could use back then. Mount Airy Sanitarium it was called. So that's a big change. Houses are built there now. One of the houses is built on Main Street right beside of our locker plant, and this building I was telling you about was right there. And the man was a builder, and he saved the roof off of this pavilion they had there, where they had their entertainment. And he built his house so that this roof, he could move it with the crane, the roof off of this pavilion over and set it on top of his house, and that's the roof of his house. And that's still there. So there's a lot of interesting stories that you come by and hear as time goes on. Don't you think we've talked enough? You want to keep on? How long have we talked?
I got you at 30 minutes.
See, that's time enough, isn't it? What else? Anything else you can think of?
You've got a wealth of information, so.
yeah. Well, that's fine. I think we've done enough.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
It's been nice having me here. I'll tell you, I appreciate it very much, and I think this kind of thing should be done all over the place so that we can preserve a little bit of what's happened in our lifetime.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right.